Welcome to our presentation on what is a civilization. And as always, we will have a teacher lesson, some vocabulary to learn, some videos, some informational and some fun, some practice, and of course, going beyond. Your teacher lesson video will be posted here. You're watching it now, so it must be. Vocabulary for this week. We have civilization is a group of people located in a certain place that share a common language, government, religion, customs, and social order. We have an empire, which is a number of civilizations put together. So it's a group of territories or nations or civilizations ruled by a single ruler or government. Agriculture is another word for farming. A surplus, just like we studied in economics, is more than is needed. It's extra. It's the opposite of a shortage. It's the opposite of scarcity. So a surplus is more than is needed. Geography is the study of the earth and the relationship between the earth and people. Religion is the belief and worship of a higher power. Most often that involves a god or gods. Achievements, those are things that you accomplish, something accomplished, like inventions or discoveries, goals reached. Politics is the way that people living in groups make decisions. This kind of thing would include government, laws, lawmakers, law enforcers, things like that. Economics is the study of how people or societies make choices. Remember, opportunity cost. We all have to make choices about how to meet our needs and our wants. And social life is how a group of people interact as well as what their daily lives look like. Remember that the word social has soc in it, and that's a Greek and Latin root for people. Now, what is a civilization? Well, people did not always live in cities, and they didn't always live in towns or villages. And there was a time when people moved from place to place in order to find plants and animals to eat. And they basically migrated from place to place, following the climate, following the animals, because they were hunters and they were gatherers. So they were always on the move to adjust to their surroundings and to find food. Once people decided to settle down in one area to grow crops and raise animals, the idea of agriculture, people started to form villages, towns, and then cities. So they no longer had to move from place to place if they settled down and farmed. That was their new source of food. Rather than hunting or gathering, they could grow food and raise animals. So because of that, and because they were staying in one place, forming villages and towns, and then civilization sprung out of that. So a civilization is a group of people that's located in a certain place that share common characteristics, things like a common language, a government, an economic system, customs, and social order. It's very important to discuss, where did early civilizations start? We're going to be studying several early civilizations, but the most important thing that we need to know is that all early civilizations started near rivers. Rivers are absolutely essential for civilizations to be successful. The access to clean water, fresh water, as opposed to salt water, and maybe it's not clean in terms of drinking, but that's a different discussion for a different day. The idea that they have water, those rivers provide a gift of life. And those rivers provide things like water for humans, water to raise animals, because all animals drink water as well, water to grow crops, so plants need water to survive. Rivers were a good source of transportation. Once the boat was invented, they could use a river for transportation up and down the river. They also used the water for cleaning and washing, and water was for making mud bricks and other buildings. Because there wasn't a lot of abundance of trees, they had to use the resources they got from the earth. And rivers allowed for them to have mud, and mud allowed them to have mud bricks to build. let's look at the earliest civilizations. When we talk about river valley civilizations, we're really talking about four main early civilizations. We're talking about Egypt, which is along the Nile River. We're talking about Mesopotamia, the area between and beside the Tigris River and the Euphrates River. We're talking about ancient India near the Indus River, and we're talking about ancient China near the Huanghe River. So these are the four earliest river valley civilizations. In this year, we're only going to cover the Eastern Hemisphere. There were some early civilizations in the Western Hemisphere, like the Inca, the Maya, and the Aztecs, but these are the original four river valley civilizations, and those are the ones we will be studying this year. So in terms of time, let's look at a timeline. Last week we studied about a timeline, and we studied about chronology. We also studied about the terms BCE and CE. BCE is, of course, before the Common Era, and CE is the Common Era. If you're following a biblical timeline, you would have BC, which most people think is before Christ, and we talked about that last week. It's actually from the Greek or Latin, and Anno Domini, which is after, in the year of our Lord. So it doesn't mean after death, but in terms of its idea, it does. So Jesus was the breaking point between BC and AD. It is also the same common era. BCE was before the life of Jesus, and CE is following. However, when we look at these four river civilizations that we are studying this year, we can go back to the earliest one was Mesopotamia. So we'll be starting with early man and moving on to Mesopotamia as the first major river valley civilization. And on this timeline, we're showing that Mesopotamia was in existence from 3500 BC to 2000 BC. So if we add 3500 BCE to the fact that it's 2021 this year, AD or CE, so we'd have to add 2021 years to 3,500 years to say that Mesopotamia was that long ago. So if we look on that timeline, you can see that it was the earliest river valley civilization. Then the next river valley civilization that was next was ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptians were around from 3100 BCE to about 1070 BCE. And of course, we still are 2,000 years later than CE. So we've got to add that time to see how long it was ago. You'll notice that Mesopotamia and Egypt overlap. It means although Mesopotamia was first and independent and on its own for a very long time, at the same time, during the rise of Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt formed as well. So they did overlap here, you can see. Then we have the Indus Valley, which was from 2500 to 1700 BCE. And we have ancient China along the Huanghe River. And that was 1700 to, it's covered by this thing, so I cannot tell you. But you'll notice that both the Indus Valley and the Huanghe River overlapped Egypt, ancient Egypt. Now, next year, you'll study about a little bit further in civilization. You'll be studying about ancient Greece, ancient Rome. And in 5th grade, you should have talked a little bit about the Mayas, the Aztecs, and the Incas. But if you look at all of these are the major early civilizations on our planet. And you can see they're all where they are located on the map. And you can see which is older than the rest. So that's kind of a timeline explaining our river valley civilizations. One thing we need to discuss is no matter what the early civilization was, whether that be Mesopotamia or ancient Egypt or ancient China or ancient India, they all had something in common. They had many things in common. They all had a stable food supply. This meant they weren't hunting and gathering. It meant they were growing food. They had invented and perfected agriculture. And that agriculture led them to be able to have a stable food supply that they didn't need to go and find every day. That they grew on their own and they stored for their future use. Every early civilization also had social classes. That's the level of importance that each person was within a society. And we'll talk about social classes when we study the first civilization of Mesopotamia. But those at the lowest classes would have had the highest poverty and the least amount of power. Those at the top of the social pyramid would have had the most money and the most power. Division of labor was something because we weren't hunters and gatherers and we started to settle in one area and have a stable food supply and have social classes. We started to divide up the work. Every civilization divided up their jobs and specialized in different things. Some people may have been farmers. Some people may have been merchants. Some would have been craftspeople. Some would have been builders. Some would have been religious leaders. Some would have been tax collectors. So they started having different jobs. And that's something all early civilizations have in common. They all started having different jobs outside of hunting and gathering. All early civilizations also invented art and music. So that was unique to each civilization. Mesopotamian art and music would have been very different from ancient Egyptian art and music, which would have been very different from ancient China and ancient India, as well as Mayan, Aztec, Inca, Greece, and Roman art and music. Every civilization developed art and music, and they all have their own unique style. Another thing that all civilizations have in common is a government. All of those governments would have had similarities and differences. We will look at those as we study each one. They all would have started building different kinds of building. That's known as architecture. What type of homes did they live in? What kinds of buildings did they build? What were their resources to build? The geography of the land would have impacted what kind of architecture they had. All early civilizations invented a form of writing. Of course, early Mesopotamian writing would have been very different from ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, and ancient India and ancient China would have had a totally different form of writing. Just like today, our writing and our language is different in the United States as it is in Mexico. We have a different language. We have a different, way of spelling things. But all civilizations invented a form of writing. And not last, but one of the major categories is religion. All early civilizations developed a religion, some sort of belief in a higher power, whether that be one god or many gods. One god is a monotheism, meaning mono is one, theism is gods, and polytheism is the belief in many gods. So poly means many, and theism means God. So that is some of the major categories that all civilizations had in common. No matter which one it was, they all would have had these similar traits. What was the key to civilization? This is exceptionally important because the difference between hunters and gatherers and that lifestyle, that nomadic lifestyle of migrating for thousands of years, just hunting and gathering food and living day to day for survival, depending on your climate and the ability to get food, was really rough. And settling down into civilization, the thing that made that possible, the most important thing that made that possible was farming, farming, farming. Another word for farming, if we're going to use an educated term, would be agriculture, the raising of crops and animals. So that is the key to forming a new civilization. Otherwise, we'd be still hunting and gathering. What was the key to farming? Well, that was water. You can't have farming without water. So some people would call the key to civilization rivers. It really depends on how you look at it, because the key to civilization was farming and the key to farming were rivers. So in theory, the key to civilization was also rivers. Once farmers were able to perfect agriculture and raise animals and crops, they had a surplus of food. A surplus of food means extra. It means they're not just having the amount of food they need to survive for one day. They're able to store food for around the year. They're able to feed more people. So cities and towns could grow larger and larger and larger because farming made a surplus of food available to them. They could stay in one place and no longer had to be nomadic or move from place to place. There are a couple of videos about agriculture and the dawn of civilization that I do highly recommend that you watch. So to sum up, rivers are essential for agriculture. You cannot grow things without rivers. Agriculture is the key to civilization. You cannot have a civilization without agriculture. And agriculture allows for a surplus. You cannot have successful civilizations without a surplus of food. So all those three things are intertwined. So if we look at this in a system that rivers lead to the ability to do farming, farming leads to the ability to have extra food or a surplus. A surplus of food leads to the idea that we can trade things. I can raise goats, another person can raise vegetables, we can trade. We don't need to do both jobs. That leads to job creation and specialization of jobs, and it also leads to a social class where some people in a civilization are deemed more important than others based on their level of power or money. People started earning money, the invention of jobs. That job growth and social classes led to the growth of cities. So cities became very small at the beginning and would grow over time as more people would add to that society or that city. And then the growth of cities led to the expansion or the growth of empires. So what starts off as many different cities can turn into an entire empire, and that is the growth of civilizations. Now, we need to take a look at what all civilizations have in common. And one fun way to do that, well, maybe it's not fun, but it's handy, is that we use an acronym called GRAPES, G-R-A-P-E-S. And an acronym is when we take letters of the alphabet and we have them stand for different words. So the G for grapes stands for geography. The R stands for religion. The A stands for achievements. The P stands for politics. The E stands for economics. And the S stands for social life. Within each one of these categories, whether we're talking about no matter if we're talking about early Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, ancient India, or ancient China, even Aztecs, Mayans, Incas, even Greece and Rome, any early civilization would have had each of these areas that had commonalities. So underneath geography, for instance, for every early river valley civilization, how does location and climate affect that civilization? Well, geography affects our whole life. Where we live determines how we live. So the location of a place would be geography. Where is Mesopotamia located? Where is ancient Egypt located? Water sources, exceptionally important. All water sources is part of geography. Any landform would be. The climate, the weather, that would be geography. How does the climate and the weather make a successful civilization or be the downfall of a civilization? Land and landforms, those affect the way we live as well. High up in the mountain, that life would be the way of life on the mountains, in the mountains, would be very different than life along the coast of the ocean, for instance. What natural resources are available to a civilization? That affects their success. That affects how long they can last or how they can provide for their people. And crops and agriculture is also part of geography because anything that grows from the earth is a natural resource. The next category that all early civilizations had in common was religion. What are the beliefs and the morals about the afterlife? Religion and beliefs would be part of religion, as would gods, religious leaders, rituals, and holidays, religious holidays. We also have achievements. Achievements are things that we accomplish, things that we have a goal, that we make our goal. So what are the lasting works of a society? What did that society or that civilization invent or discover? So anything about technology, inventions, the forms of writing that were invented, the science and math discoveries, art, music, architecture, medicine, and transportation, all of those inventions made that civilization grow and be successful. Politics is kind of another word for government, and it's who runs the society and how is it run. What is the government like? What are the laws? What are the lawmakers? What are the leaders? How are they decided on? What's the court system? Is there military and wars? Is there conflict? Conflict between cities, conflict between societies, conflict between civilizations and empires. That is all part of politics. Then we have economics. That's how does the society use the resources it has to satisfy needs and wants. Things like jobs. Jobs is part of the economy. Trade, trading things one for the other. The invention of money. Division of labor into different kinds of specialized jobs. The collection of taxes in order to pay for things. Specialization of jobs and talents. and of course money. Social life is the last category that all early civilizations have in common, and that is what is daily life like for the different members within the society. Now that starts with social classes and social pyramids. That's the degree to which a person is important or valued within a society. Those at the very top with the most money and power, those at the bottom with the least amount of money and the least amount of power. What is daily life like? So what kind of houses did people live in? What was their clothing? What food did they eat? What were their traditions? What language did they use with each other? And especially the roles of men and women. In each early civilization, the roles of men and women would have been different. So studying the early civilizations, you will get an idea of all of these different categories and how these civilizations had things in common, but also had differences in the area of GRAPES, grapes, geography, religion, achievements, politics, economics, and social life. In this video, I highly encourage you to watch this, and we may watch it in class, but it's about the growth of the early civilization. So it's a fascinating video. It's not very long, but it will go with a timeline at the bottom, and it will show you from the very early expansion of early people all the way up until modern times. So it's definitely a video worth watching. Getting ready for our quiz. So, can you answer the following questions? What is a civilization? Where did civilization start? Why were rivers important to early civilizations? What were the four major early civilizations? What are the common characteristics of civilizations? What's the acronym we will use to organize information about civilizations? What does GRAPES stand for? Grapes. How does geography impact the development of the first civilizations? What was the importance of farming for early civilizations? What does it mean to have a surplus? And what does having a surplus of food allow to happen? You should be able to answer all of these questions. Of course, there are a number of videos, so especially if you were not able to answer those questions, you may go on here and watch some of these videos to give you a little bit more interesting information about the history of the earliest river valley civilizations. It is time for practice. Can you match all of the definitions to the appropriate word from the word bank? Can you do it without a word bank? We are also going to practice on a map where the early civilizations are. As you look on this map, there are many different locations that we have learned sometime during the year. So can you tell me what civilization is number 1 along the Nile River? What civilization is along the Tigris and Euphrates River? What civilization is along the Indus River? What civilization is along the Huanghe River? What continent is this? What ocean is this? What ocean is this? Do you know what body of water this is? How about this body of water? How about this continent? How about this continent? This is a new one you may not know. This is the Persian Gulf. It's a good idea to put it in your wheelhouse so that moving forward you know what it is, because it's very important to the early civilization of Mesopotamia. Another opportunity for practice. Each of these words fit into one of these spaces. It is not exact. They all have the same level of spaces to add to, but not all of them fit everywhere. So can you move these things into this area? In order to practice that, you'll need to hit this link. It will take you directly to the online practice where you can move the words and then score yourself to see how much you need to study. Likewise, there is a link here for some flashcard practice. The flashcard on one side will give you something that goes in the categories of grapes, and you'll have to determine which of the letters it fits under. Does it go under geography, religion, achievements, politics, economics, or social life? You can practice because that will get you ready for the quiz. And going beyond, there is a video that you might find interesting, and it's basically a walk throughout time from early man all the way through all of the ancient civilizations into medieval Europe, so you can see how civilizations grew over time. It is going beyond. It is certainly not necessary, but it might be interesting to you, and I found the graphics to be really well done. So I enjoyed it, and maybe you will too. So in closing, make sure that you watch some of the videos. Make sure that you've watched this video and understand the teacher lesson for the week. Practice your vocabulary. You can do some practice to see if you're ready for the quiz. And we will start studying the early civilizations after we study early man. We will move on to Mesopotamia and then ancient Egypt, ancient India, and ancient China. So good luck on your quiz that's coming up soon.